and I have not seen any action on those things right now. If someone gets injured along this hazardous section of Pacific Highway, it'll be unconscionable that the city council or the city did not take action to mitigate those hazards. And I would strongly recommend the city do something to correct those hazards along Pacific Highway. Thank you. Now different comment, let me put my planning commission hat on. If you have not had an opportunity to go out to Riverside Estates at night, I would strongly encourage you to do that because the new street lights are out there. And I hope you will agree with me that they're much better than the ones we currently have. There's no uplight, there's very little glare. You're putting the light on the streets where you want it. So if you haven't done that, I encourage you to go out and look at it. I would certainly be welcome any feedback you might have on those street lights.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Boff.
Hello, Council. Sean Wright, 305 West 3rd Street. I'd like to follow up on a lot of things you've been hearing tonight. I want to talk about the current safety of our streets, our engineering street standards, and the Northwest Pacific Highway 4th Street Lockwood corridor. In January 2020 alone, there were 8 drunk drivers and over 100 traffic stops in the city of El Centro. In the past 10 years, there have been several automobile accidents in the core of our town. I've plotted these according to location and severity on the map provided in the brochure. As a nation, we lose over 33,000 lives per year due to single-occupant vehicles. And despite this staggering loss of life, advancement in automobile crash technology has overwhelmingly decreased the risk to drivers. Unfortunately, though, these advancements have done little for pedestrians or cyclists. They are not afforded a 2-ton metal crumple zone wherever they go. When viewing the map of crashes in the city of El Centro, we see a standard trend of dendritic roadway systems, the least density and severity of crashes on our lower speed roads, while the highest density and severity is on our arterial roadways. It's imperative that we get the design of all streets right. For residential streets, adopting a yield flow street standard can have a massive impact on safety. But what is most important is that we take the design of our critical arterial streets as absolutely imperative. A single corridor, the Northwest Pacific Highway 4th Street and Lockwood corridor, is a mandatory pathway for all of our tractors. Our parks, schools, library, essentially the heart of our town. This corridor will define our city for decades to come, and if we don't design it safely, people will die. Currently, our arterial street detail prescribes 2 12-foot wide vehicle lanes, a 12-foot wide center turn lane, and 2 6-foot wide bicycle lanes. Even on Northwest Pacific Highway with a span of 3,300 feet that runs absolutely straight. We then throw up a 25-mile-per-hour sign and hope for the best. But people don't drive according to the posted limit. People drive according to how a roadway is engineered. And this roadway is being engineered to support speeds above 60 miles per hour. The only reasoning I've been provided for the wide lanes is that it facilitates oversized loads, which will soon be routed elsewhere, and that the AASHTO design manual suggests this size for rural collectors, a claim which is based on the conveyance of average daily trips, an absolutely fictitious basis for the design of roadway width. And standard design manuals are not a one-size-fits-all, and often they can do a lot of harm. The story of Confusion Corner in Stuart, Florida is a great example of this, a concatenation of 7 streets and a railroad track. The State Department of Transportation was prepared to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to reconfigure the entire area because their manual suggested it was dangerous. Local citizens, however, defended their notorious postcard-worthy intersection, and despite the intersection's reputation, studies revealed that it was among the region's safest major intersections, with only 1 accident in its multi-decade history. The deadliest local intersections were the standard Department of Transportation models.
Pardon me, we're at 3 minutes.
Complex street intersections elicit caution, which translates into slower and more attentive driving. The traffic engineering manuals, with their blind spot towards relationship between environment and behavior, argue against complexity. When we as a community understand the dangers of our roadway systems, and we simply throw down some extra asphalt, paint a white line, throw up a sign, and check mark the complete street box, we are essentially saying we don't care about the lives of the third of our population that does not drive, especially our children. I suggest that we design our streets to a safer standard and provide protective infrastructure to bicyclists on high-speed streets. That is a standard practice in the Netherlands, where they boast significantly lower vehicle accident rates.
Excuse me, Mr. Wright. Your 3 minutes is up. If you could bring it to a conclusion, please. If you could just bring it to a conclusion.
We cannot continue to perpetuate dangerous infrastructure. No more lives need to be lost. That's all.
Very good. Thank you.
This time I'm up here as Dynamo Chair of the Planning Commission, and just a quick letter to request to re-add Parks and
Could you
Trails.
give us your
section.
name and address, please?
Oh, Dinah McLean, 1982 East Highton Circle. This is a request to re-add a Parks and Trails section to the Community Development Staff Report. In a survey that was conducted by the City of LaCenter, Parks and Trails were reported to be of importance to its citizens. Additionally, the Planning Commission worked to prioritize Parks and Trails in the comprehensive plan, and the city has approved that comprehensive plan. There is a concern that Parks and Trails are falling by the wayside and are not receiving the attention they deserve. And there used to be a section on the Community Development Staff Report for Parks and Trails. It highlighted any new plans for Parks and Trails, as well as any grant applications in progress were awarded. If grants were awarded and trails were in progress, it listed updates for them. So please re-add a Parks and Trails section to the Community Development Staff Report. Additionally, please leave it on the report even if there are no current updates for a given month, so that it remains on the report for future city council reports, and so that Parks and Trails do not fall through the cracks. And that would include one like along Pacific Highway that go up to the junction, other ones that connect various trails throughout the city.
Very good. Thank you.
Al Fellow, 152 West 15th Street. I just want to make a correction. Earlier, somebody had said that Pacific Highway crosses Jenny Creek there in the city limits of the center. I grew up on Jenny Creek, and it's there's one little section over on, 14th Avenue that, crosses into the center, but it's not there on Pacific Highway. Thank you.
Very good. Appreciate that. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Eric Kahn, and I'm at 30900 Northeast 26th Avenue. My family sold 100 acres to the county on the bottomlands.
So
And
excuse me, Mr. Conlon, I think your comment pertains
Yeah.
to the annexation that's going to
Right.
happen. So if you could please hold that
Sure.
until we actually have that
okay,
presentation.
yeah, no worries. We'll do
Yeah.
that.
Thank you. Sorry, I should have been clear on that in my opening remarks.
Jim Irish, 1653 East Heritage Loop. Mayor, City Council members, and citizens of the center. In December of 2018, we had a count and a check, and there were 794 lots that could be developed into single multi-family dwelling and multi-family dwellings. We have, and according to McKay Esposito's report last meeting, of all 95 pages of it, it was a very good report putting out what needed to be done as far as the city is concerned to have the proper forms and the proper formats in order to develop, continually to develop the city. The one thing it doesn't, and it was put in under the community development report, the one thing it doesn't address is how to go out and get business, which this city needs desperately in order to keep functioning without having to reduce staff, without having to reduce further at the residents' expense, in order to keep the city running with our income, the city's income coming in, being slowly brought down with the card rooms, et cetera, that we need, and we do have the report, the development out at the junction, but there's no other businesses in line, and according to the report, that's in line to come into the city of LaCenter. Without having any other money coming in, we are going to be facing a more reduction in forces in order to make the money, in order to pay the staff, or count the cost. In 2007, we had a meeting with the City of Richfield, the City of LaCenter, the City of Woodland, and the City of Battleground, in which we presented to vendors that we went out and solicited. Come out and see what we have for you. Come and see our report. Come and see what we have. And we had busloads of people going through there, of which the Public Works Director and members of the staff and Planning Commission went with him. And we're pointing out to them areas in which we could develop, in which we could grow. Then we had this slight downturn in the economy in 2008 and 2009. And then when we started back up again, we had another a plan put out for the IT and that type of development coming in. But it has all been to no avail. We have worked with the shoes that you are filling, Mr. Kearns'
Pardon me, we're at 3
help.
minutes.
We have a good rapport and a good working relationship with the tribe. And I appreciate Dan Kearns' work in doing that, and I appreciate the 12 years that he gave me service and helped me keep the city going in the right path. And I know you will too. So congratulations to you. But I also want to say how much I appreciate the work that Dan Kearns did. But we need to move forward on getting businesses into the city and not have them turned down. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no one else stepping up to the podium, I'll close public comment and we'll get on with the balance of the meeting. Next are the mayor's report. I just have one quick item for this evening. Just a reminder that Wednesday, March 4th, will be my next mayor's town hall meeting. The meetings are held at the Public Works meeting room, and they begin at 6:30, and everybody's welcome. They're a very informal meeting, and like I say, everybody's welcome, and generally they're good meetings, so please put that on your calendar. That's all I have this evening. Next is the attorney's report. Mr. Potter, I don't know that you have anything this evening. It's pretty fresh, but
I'm going to keep it very brief.
okay.
Mayor, no, I don't have.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
First night on the job.
Okay. So next we have council comments. Councilmember Boff.
No, thank you, Mayor. I have nothing tonight.
Councilmember Stimmel.
Well, I just wanted to thank you for your comments on the focus on parks and trails. I totally agree. When I came here 8 years ago, that was what I loved about the city most. When we found Breezy Creek, I just thought it was amazing. And then in the the following years, there would be water damage. Sometimes there would be kids kicking posts over, and I guess this is kind of aimed at you guys. You guys would fix that within a day. So I think Parks and Trails is a focus in the city, but I'd love to see more, kind of selfishly. Second thing, I was able to take my boys to see the game up in Kelso. I don't know if you guys know this, but the La Center basketball team took districts. And I just, half an hour ago, came from a 7th and 8th grade game, and all of those boys from the high school team were watching the 7th and 8th graders. I just thought it was awesome. My boys are roughly 9 and 11, something like that. I have 3, so it changes every year. So it's very difficult to keep track of. And those, yeah, I tried to get them to come with me. And those high school boys at the finish of that game took time to say hi to the little kids and make them feel important. And here they were showing up at a middle school game, and I'm so proud of our town and the kids in our town. It is truly a wonderful place to live. So that's all. But Mayor, thank you.
Very nice. Thank you, Councilmember Stimmel. Councilmember Williams.
I have nothing tonight, Mayor. Thank you.
Councilmember Strobehn.
Nothing tonight. Thank you.
Councilmember Cerveny.
I don't have anything to add either.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Next, we'll have staff reports. This evening, we have 2 staff reports. The first one will be the Community Development Staff Report, and Mr. Jeff Swanson, our Community Development Director, will be presenting.
Good evening, Council. Let's be going to mess with the screen here a little bit so we can get the map of projects up here. And get this technology to work with me here. Here we go. Well, first off, I'll start with a brief narrative, as I always do. First item, The McCase-Pizzuto report, the last council meeting, we heard Marty Snell's presentation on the work that they've done, and staff have been meeting to develop a basic project tracking system or mechanism. So we're working on developing and implementing that. And there's remaining budget, as Mr. Snell mentioned in his presentation, and we're focusing that effort on updating our fee schedule, so that that was another one of the strong recommendations that came out of the report, was to get our fee table updated and adopted by the council. So we've got McCase-Pizzuto focused on doing that, incorporating some of the earlier work done by Paul Lewis on fee recovery to balance out what tends to be an under recovery of cost on land use and an over recovery on building. And SAO has kind of looked askance at some of those practices in cities, so we're trying to balance that out. We have a report now from DKS Associates on the analysis of the La Center Road, Paradise Park Road intersection that we're currently reviewing. This next item we've spent a tremendous amount of effort on over the past few weeks, and that's concerns over House Bill 2230. And this would provide a fee in lieu tax exemption for tribal-owned parcels off the reservation. And so this would be, the way the statute currently reads, the fee in lieu of tax is negotiated by the county. And we have been pursuing an amendment. It passed, the House Bill 2230 passed the House. It's going to be heard, I think, in Ways and Means on the Senate side here very shortly. And so we're looking for both sponsors on the Republican and Democratic side to amend the language and simply say, rather than counties negotiate the fee in lieu, that affected jurisdictions negotiate the fee in lieu. So that would include the county, any cities, school districts, fire districts, port districts, and any other special purpose districts that are affected by that type of an action, so that we can ensure some balance and equity in that sort of situation. La Center City Hall, the new La Center City Hall project progress continues. Final finishes and material selections for the interior have been made, and those are being submitted for incorporation into the construction documents. I'll go now, you have the project table in front of you, but I'll bring up the map and kind of walk through so you can see geographically where these are at and give you updates on a few of these projects. I want to bring to your attention the Schlentz annexation, which is on the agenda for this evening. That's number 5 on the map, which is, I'll use this fun laser pen here. Number 5 is right there, so that's the Schlentz annexation that'll be heard in hearing tonight. Let's see, the La Center Middle School project, that's number 7. And on that one, the critical areas and final site plan permits have been issued, and building permits are awaiting pickup. On number, let's see here, sorry, I'm trying to read this very small print. Number 8, which is on the next map down, this project here, it's a Minute Management. We had pre-application conference last year in May, and we're anticipating over the next couple of weeks we'll see a submission from them for both site plan and for building approval, so that what they want to do is concurrent review on the building plans and on the site plans. And so they're anxious. That generally signals that they're anxious to get a project started there. So, and I believe they intend to get that approved forthwith and begin construction this summer. So it'll be exciting to see that one come to fruition. Let's see, on Highland Terrace. So that's number 14 on the map, right there. Across Riverside Estates is here, and Highland Terrace is across the road on Pacific Highway. We're waiting submission of final engineering plans on that one, but civil plans were submitted on the 7th of this month. So that one is moving forward. Let's see. Holly subdivision, which is number 15 right there. They have final site plan approval, and they have 3 single-family residential plans that are under review, and they're awaiting building permits on those. Let's see, Kay's Place, number 16, right there. Kay's Place, 1 single-family residence has been constructed. There were 5 plans approved in 2019, so all their plans have been approved, the ones that have been submitted. On number 17, Riverside Estates, let's see, so we have the Phase 1 lots, the off-site sewer is under construction, the Phase 2 engineering has been approved, and the Phase 3 final site plan is under review. 18 building plans have been approved, and homes are under construction now. And then let's see. Number 21. This is a new one, the council. That's this one right here. This is called Summit Ridge. This is we've held a pre-application conference for this development. It's 86 single-family residences and 343 multifamily residences are what were proposed in the pre-application conference. And our planner from WSP issued notes on the 20th in response to the pre-application conference. So there will be some correspondence back and forth while their plans are refined based on the planner's review of their intentions and our comp plan and city code. Let's see, number 22 is a new project. That's right there. This is Bellica Townhomes. It's a 4 townhome site plan review at 7th and Cedar. The application that they submitted, however, was deemed incomplete at the end of January. So there's some work to do there. In other news, in terms of citywide projects, the Shoreline Master Program, the grant contract with the Department of Ecology has been approved, and our consultant has started work on that. The deadline for the Shoreline Master Program update has been extended to June of 2021. On the planned action area and sub-area plan for the historic town center in Timmon Landing, the RFP is nearly complete, and we expect to put that out. I was thinking by the end of February, but then House Bill 2230 hit the street, and so we've spent a considerable amount of time on that, but I think in the next couple of weeks we'll put that out for an RFP. And that is my report. Are there any questions that I can attempt to answer?
I have a question on one of the new ones that just showed up, Summit Ridge.
Okay, yep.
Is the access to that proposed to be off 13th Avenue?
Yeah, I believe it's that private road that comes off of. So currently the access proposed, I believe, would be this private alignment. But I know that they are looking for alternative routes, like to get down to Spencer Road. So I think the access is still kind of up in the air a little bit.
That's currently zoned low density, 7.5. How does that tie in with the numbers that I see here?
Well, you recall the some of our discussions in prior meetings about density transfer and comprehensive plan goals. This is that 50-acre site, that 27 or 20 acres of which is actually developable because of sensitive areas, steep slopes, and so on. So there's a bit of a tug there because as a city, we planned on seeing 7.5 units per acre on 50 acres, but only 28 of which are developable. So in terms of meeting our comprehensive plan goals, that's a challenge. So the development proponent is coming in, proposing a change in the land use with higher density there. I think I can share that their concept is for kind of a 55 and older lifestyle sort of community. They see this as a great community to locate for retirement because of nearby golfing, recreation opportunities, entertainment opportunities, and so that is the demographic they intend to market to. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? No? Okay, well, thank you very much, Council.
Great report. Thank you very much. So next staff report we have is the finance staff report, and Mr. Dustin Bailey will present.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. Listener Municipal Code 50510 makes it unlawful for any person to engage in business in whole or in part within the city without first having registered with and obtained a business license from the city. So this is just an update of some of the things we've talked about in a few meetings regarding the transition of the city's processing of business licenses. And with Ordinance 2019-21, we started that process with the approval of the council. Just wanted to note that the city staff have worked with the Department of Revenue to transition the database over to the state. Process was finalized and the system went live on February 6th. I have in my staff report a link to the city's business license portal, so when you go on that link, you can actually see the City of La Center provides you details of the cost breakdown and how to apply. And the City of La Center is listed with 120 other cities from across the state. So far, the process has been pretty seamless, easy to manage, and we've already started receiving revenues from the state for licenses that have been applied for. The 2020 census, just some details for the council. Participation in the United States Census is critical in many ways for Washington cities, including the distribution of funds and benefits to citizens, programs that benefit the citizens. One group estimated that each household miss cost about $4,800. So it's critical for the city to make sure our account is accurate for 2020. Staff included an insert in the February utility bill to inform residents of the census, and we described the shift in process that the census is taking this time, which is more focused on online self-reporting. And to better facilitate this, there is a workstation at City Hall. It's usually on the counter. It's a laptop, and citizens can come in and use that. And then we also confirmed with the La Center Library that all the workstations there are available for citizens. So if they would like to register online, they don't have internet, there are options. And then beginning in May, the census workers will start going door to door, just so everybody's aware. If you see people walking around going door to door, that's probably who they are. And the count's expected to be finalized by the end of December. And then finally, the gambling tax breakdown. I have for you the revenues through January, which is our first month. Are there any questions? All right, thank you.
Okay, very good. Good report. Thank you. So this evening we have two public hearings. The first one is on the discuss the draft Cottage Housing Code, and this evening will be presented by Mr. Ethan Spool, our contract city planner.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. There's a couple of us that have to set the microphone up a little higher. I'm one and Jeff is the other. So this is a project that goes back a number of years to 2017. I'm going to give Mike a second to pull up the presentation here. Right, the one above that, cottage housing.
Oh, cottage housing, sorry.
It's okay. So this is a project that goes back quite a while to 2017. And Councilmember Boff was on the Planning Commission at that time, and so he contributed significantly to the development and research of this code, and so we thank him for his work. So what we want to do is just kind of summarize for you what's in the draft code and then give you an opportunity to answer questions. Cottage housing is something that's becoming more and more popular, especially around the Puget Sound. I don't know of a cottage housing development in Clark County. However, Clark County did adopt a cottage housing code in 2018. So the centers would be following on to that. And there's a couple reasons why. Excuse me here while we advance slides. Where's the advance?
You should be able to just scroll down.
Oh, scrolling, okay. So there's a couple reasons why cottage housing is starting to become more popular. One is just that housing is becoming more and more expensive. I think everybody's generally aware of that, and there's a discussion going on at the national level about housing unaffordability. And so in La Center, and this is pretty current information, in January, the Realtors Multiple Listing Service says that the average home price in La Center is $469,000. That's quite a bit. That's at the upper end that a middle-class family can afford. On top of that, the city is projected to grow. As you know, we're growing. We've had this discussion already tonight with the developments along Pacific Highway. The comprehensive plan projects that the city will need 1,667 dwelling units by 2036, and I can tell you that we're already significantly into that number in just four or so years. 50%, just another affordability figure for you there, 50% of families in Clark County are spending more than 30% on housing, and 30% is that level which is sort of used as a measure more or less universally as what's affordable or not. If you spend less than 30% on your housing, it's generally considered to be affordable for you, and if you spend more than 30% of your gross income, that's considered to be unaffordable. So I mentioned that this project does go back just a little ways to 2017. So the Planning Commission's been working on this for roughly 3 years. There was a Planning Commission hearing in November of 2017, and the cottage housing, the draft Cottage Housing Code came before the City Council in 2018. So that was quite a while ago. Then there was some more discussions with the Planning Commission through 2019, and then a hearing at the end of 2019 and into the beginning of 2020 at the Planning Commission level, another hearing. So if you just kind of think about the spectrum of housing that's out there in the world, you've got, on one end of the spectrum, kind of the smallest type of housing that you have are ADUs, or accessory dwelling units, and then single-family homes, and then you kind of move on up, and this is kind of what you see in downtown Portland. And La Center has primarily single-family homes. There's, I guess, maybe one apartment building, and then some others under development. And so one of the main purposes of the Cottage Housing Code would be to provide another type of housing that developers could develop and provide for the center. And given some of those reasons we talked about before, affordability, as well as just changing demographics, single parent households, retirees, and so forth, that need smaller housing. And cottage housing is seen as an attractive but yet affordable way to live. So the draft code would essentially apply this, the cottage housing concept, or allow for cottage housing developments in all of the city's residential zones. And so, that includes areas out at the junction and the town residential district, the residential professional district, as well as the mixed-use area at Timmon, and then, the vacant areas of the low-density residential district, 7.5. But there's sort of a higher bar that the code anticipates for those lower density residential areas, with sort of a focus on compatibility with those areas. And so there's some additional criteria that we look at, or that the code would apply to those areas. And you can see some of those up here on your screen. So if cottage housing develops in low-density residential areas, it has to be grouped with a long plat or a long subdivision of at least 10 lots. And it has to achieve a density of between 4 and 14 units per net developable acre. So that's, on the 4 end of the spectrum, that's sort of consistent with the city's existing single-family neighborhoods, and then the 14-unit end of the spectrum is essentially medium-density townhouse style development. You would also, in these low-density residential areas, have to have a critical area, would have to comprise 25% of the cottage housing development, and that's, again, to kind of provide a buffer between that and the single-family areas. And it would have to, of course, be connected to the single-family area by roads, and then comply with all of the other cottage housing requirements that we're talking about here tonight. So some of the development basics that the code outlines, and I forgot to mention at the top of my presentation that something really important to keep in mind here is that, as opposed to a lot of the other planning and zoning codes that we come before you and talk to you about, cottage housing is an optional concept. So this code is exercised and put in place and implemented when a developer asks for cottage housing. So it's just an option that they can ask for, as opposed to critical areas, which I was talking to you about a couple of months ago, and that's sort of a mandatory thing, and everybody has to do that has critical areas on their site. So some of the basic development characteristics of cottage housing. Each cottage housing development would have up to 12 units, and they could be divided into multiple clusters or just one cluster of between 4 to 12 units. And each of those cottage housing developments would have to be separated by 750 feet. Again, that's just to provide some compatibility and integration into the existing development framework of the center. 10-foot setbacks all around the cottages, and a 2,000 square foot minimum lot size. Each cottage housing unit would have to have 3 parking spaces, and so that's actually higher than the number of parking spaces that we're currently requiring for single-family units, which only require 2. So you would have to have 2 parking spaces per cottage housing unit, and then one of those would have to be shared for a guest situation. The cottages themselves, again, those are intended to be smaller than single-family units. So the maximum ground floor area would be up to 1,000 square feet, and then the total size of the cottage could be 1.5 times the ground floor, so up to 1,500 square feet for some of these cottages, but generally probably less than that, with the minimum at 700 square feet. There's been a real emphasis in the code placed on design. And again, that's getting back to that compatibility issue, just trying to avoid repetition and create visual interest on these cottages so that they can visually integrate with the community. So the code requires things like varied roof lines and things like gables and different pitches and dormers and things like that on the roofs. Different types of window treatments, entries and bases. and then alternating the different types of buildings, so you can't have the same two buildings right next to each other, oriented the same way, and so forth. Articulation, which is kind of this architectural term that's meant to really just kind of convey detail, is something that's really emphasized in the code as these units face public areas and streets. And then finally, modulation, which is kind of the setting back or forward of building walls. The units would have to have trim on them, and the code gets pretty specific in that area, 3.5-inch trim around all windows and exterior doors, as well as roof overhangs. And each cottage would have to have a porch that would have to be a minimum of 80 square feet. So talking just a little bit about open space, again, that's kind of really at the center of this cottage housing concept, with all of the units fronting on these open spaces, or a significant number of them. So each cottage housing development would have to have 500 square feet of common open space, but the smallest open space, no matter how few units you have, would be 3,000 square feet, and 80% of the units would have to abut that open space. Different types of improvements would be required in those areas, so you can't just kind of sort of leave an area that has really nothing in it. So, you know, things like gardens and barbecue pits, and potentially game areas and benches and things like that the residents can enjoy and interact with each other. Critical areas can count towards some of those common open spaces, provided you have a bark chip trail located in the critical area buffer. And private open space is also required. So each unit has to have 300 square feet of private open space. So, you know, taken together, you have 500 square feet of common open space, 300 square feet of private open space, a total of 800 square feet of open space per unit, which is quite a bit. So, you know, you can see in this graphic here that what the idea is having all of these things sort of centered on and facing these common open spaces. There's a variety of other standards in the code addressing parking and landscaping and lighting. I won't go into too much here. Community buildings are optional and not required, but those have to meet some of those same design standards that we've talked about. And cottage housing developments would be reviewed under a Type 3 process. That's the same process that's used for subdivisions. And so that would go to the hearings examiner. So it's not very often that the city council is going to have a public hearing on cottage housing. So with that, I'll take any questions that you have about the code, and again, just appreciate the Planning Commission's hard work over 3 years on this, and especially Councilmember Boff.
Thank you.
The parking area, did I hear you correctly say there was 3 spaces per unit?
Right.
Is that realistic with the amount of property? Because even from your drawing there, I was counting them up real quick. There was no way you were going to squeeze 21 parking spaces on that lot.
Yeah, I think it is a relatively high number. I think it's something that the Planning Commission felt was important to ensure that you're not having sort of these spillover effects of cars onto adjacent streets and so forth. And so it's also sort of a different concept. And so if you think about these cottages, they're fronting on open spaces. Sometimes they have alleys behind them that access the garages. But you really don't have, for all intents and purposes, you don't have street parking. So if you drive through a normal subdivision, you have driveways and then garages as well as street parking. You know, and you don't always think about that, but in this case, it's sort of taking the street parking and putting it in a common area. So if you were to count, you know, the parking that's provided for a standard single-family residence and then all of the on-street parking, you'd probably be up above and beyond the 3 spaces actually being provided. So it's just the code standard that says 2 spaces per single family unit and 3 here, but in reality it's probably the fact that the single family neighborhoods would still have more parking.
Yeah, I've been in Portland's area that's got them that are out front, and then Lincoln City has them, and I see the cars just crammed in there. And
Yeah.
That's usually the problem that I see with cottage housing.
Right.
Other than that, they're great. They're
Yeah.
a great concept, a great idea. It's the parking that I see
Yeah.
an issue with.
Yeah, no, I think that it's sort of, there's some pluses and minuses with these things, and one of the things that you're doing here is you're sort of squeezing more into a smaller area, and so that's kind of one of the things that, one of the trade-offs that the residents are making here.
When I was working on this project, I visited 2 cottage housing developments, and one was out in Newport, Oregon, and I was able to run into the realtor who sold those units. Now, they're all sold now, but I happened to run into the realtor who was working there at the time when they were for sale, and she told me that the biggest complaint that they had was parking. And one of those reasons was that a large percentage of the residents were seniors, retired, and whenever holidays would come about and families would come over, families had no place to park. Right? It was a major, major complaint over there. So we, on the Planning Commission, took that into consideration when this recommendation was put into the draft.
Thank you.
Yes.
Good. So, any other discussion or questions, council, before I open up the public hearing? Okay, very good. Well, then at 7:28, I will open up the public hearing. If anybody would like to address the council, please step up to the podium and give us your name and address. And if you could limit your comments to 3 minutes.
Al Fuller, 152 West 15th Street. Wow, that was a lot of information, and I'm glad I don't have to pour through it. So I just encourage you all to do your due diligence. If you need a little extra time to look at this, please do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dennis Nubrock again, 1509 Northwest 339th. I guess this is a technical question on the ordinance. The ordinance title, well, let me back up. We're doing 2 things here. We're adding a new chapter, 185, and we're also making revisions to 1840, which is the definitions. And the title of the ordinance does mention the definitions, but down in section 2 of the adoption section, it does not mention 1840. So I don't want to, we've done this before where we have implemented only part of the code. So I don't know.
You're right, and I
Okay.
just noticed the same thing, and there's 2 ways we can handle that. The title does say it's amending 1840, the definition section, and the amendment, as I read it, is there's an inclusion of the term defining cottage and a definition of cottage housing development. So section 2 adopts the new chapter 18185, but there's no reference in the operative part of the ordinance to the amendment of 1840. So 2 ways to proceed here. 1, make clear in the motion that the intent is to adopt 18185 and to amend 1840-010 to include cottage and cottage housing development as definitions. If you make that clear in the motion that's passed, we can fix the ordinance to reflect what was passed tonight. The alternative would be to continue the hearing.
Yeah.
And so I'm assuming that the notice that went out to the public is consistent with the title of the ordinance. That's typically how notices are prepared, are based on the title, which does include the amendment to 1840. So
Yes.
there you go.
Okay.
Thank you.
So with that being said, we'll continue on with a public hearing, and I would opt for the continuance. Council, I don't know what your thoughts are, but, okay. So, yeah, if anyone else would like to address the council? Okay, seeing no one stepping up to the podium, I will close the public hearing at 7:30. Turn it back over to council for any other discussion.
I think I agree with you. We should have it rewritten and then have it in
With the continuance? Okay,
Yeah.
we need a motion for.
Yes, I
that.
do. A motion to continue. I think March 11 is your next meeting
Yeah.
date.
Could you pull a motion or the reference number for the motion so we have that? Scroll down to the bottom.
Before we table it, can I ask a question for Nathan?
Sure, absolutely.
I'm confused on where this would be utilized. I don't understand how, for low-density zoning, you could implement cottage housing. Doesn't that kind of defeat the purpose of having low-density zoning to start with? If you could just simply build more houses than the zone says you can?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question. And so I think that this is not something that's atypical in cottage housing codes. But you're right. I mean, if somebody was developing cottage housing, it would be above and beyond the density of the LDR zone, and this ordinance would specifically allow that to happen.
So I don't have a ton of expertise in really zoning in general. I'm an engineer, but are we painting ourselves into a corner where developers see a loophole and come in and exploit our loophole that we've created in zoning for low density? Is that something that happens with these? You said this is similar to what Vancouver's. I just don't know if we're creating a problem.
Well, I mean, I guess I would say that it's something to take into consideration. And so if that's something that's not appealing to the council, we could scale the density back somewhat and handle it that way. But it is pretty common to do it this way. And I think Clark County's code allows for a doubling of the density in the underlying zone. And so that's essentially what's happening here. But I think what part of the cottage housing concept is tucking these cottages in between some of the critical areas that wouldn't otherwise be usable for single-family houses, areas that are maybe too small to put single-family houses. If you have some tight nooks and crannies, so to speak, in these critical areas, I think that's one of the concepts that the Planning Commission was trying to promote.
Okay, thank you. Does that answer your question? Or?
Yeah, I may bug Doug later.
It's a policy choice for sure, and
Yeah,
so
no,
yeah.
good question. Yep.
Thank you.
What would the loopholes be, though, by doing that? What would be opening up the what loopholes could we open by doing that?
Well, I don't know that I don't know that I personally would describe it as a loophole. It's just something that you need to be aware of when you're adopting this, that it will allow for higher density in these low-density residential areas. But some of those other things that we talked about, the separation between units, the limitation on the number of units per cluster would help mitigate for that, as well as some of the landscape setbacks and so forth.
Okay, good. Thank you.
I've got a question for you, Ethan. I'm in Portland quite a bit because I do rideshare driving. This density seems to be something that would be better suited for an area where they have better public transportation. We don't have that here. You have to go someplace to get some transportation. To me, what Tom said about the parking and what Doug said about the parking, it kind of bothers me because people have cars.
Mm-hmm.
And especially up here, if there's no transportation, they're going to have cars. Or limited transportation, I should say. They're going to have cars, and I'd hate to see us get into a narrow street situation where we just really paint ourselves into a corner.
Emergency services and such like that even happening.
Yeah, if they're going to cause this kind of density, we may need to have wider streets in those sections to allow for parking on both sides of the street, because it's going to happen.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think there's no doubt that it's a different paradigm that we're talking here. And so, I mean, the traditional paradigm is a single-family residential neighborhood is all of these houses fronting on the street, and the streets are very wide and allow parking on both sides and enough room for 2 cars to pass and a fire engine as well. So this is definitely a different paradigm, and you know, we sort of went through some of the purposes of that. It would still allow for emergency access. The alleys, some of these things would have alleys in the back of them, so the cars would be tucked away. There would be garages required on each of the units that would be attached garages, and so, but the front of the units would be on this common open space, and so it's really just kind of a different animal. There's no doubt about that.
Okay. Any other questions or discussion?
I think I'd like to see some changes to the parking, or
Yeah.
dive into it deeper, just because of my own experience in these neighborhoods like that. That is a concern.
We can do some more research on that and see what some of the other cottage housing developments are doing, as well as, you know, kind of what the upper ends of parking requirements are for these things.
I see a lot of the older areas down in Portland too, parking is just a mess. People use their garages as warehouses, they don't use them to put their cars in anymore. Well, yeah, I think Doug probably does too, and then, but no, I mean, my garage is full of crap, there's no parking in it. So, yeah, I think we need to visit more. What do we need to do with this?
Well, just a motion for continuance. I think if we just reference the motion, or, yeah, the ordinance and the continuance to the next city council meeting.
Let's see if I can do this. Mayor, I move to table the draft cottage housing code, table the discussion of the draft cottage housing code, Center Municipal Code 18.185 and ordinance 2020-01.
To the next city council meeting?
To a future city council meeting.
A future city council meeting. I don't know that we can do that because it's too vague for our noticing.
Well, yeah, so tabling it would just indefinitely remove this from your agenda, as opposed to a motion to continue to a specific date. So they're two different motions.
Well, my intent here was that I don't want to limit whoever's revising this to the next meeting. So that's why I said.
You want to table it? Okay, that's a motion.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to table Cottage Housing Code, Center Municipal Code 18-1 or .185 and Ordinance 2020-01 to a future meeting. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Councilor.
Mayor, I'd like to say one thing. Ethan, thank you for your nice comments, but I think it needs to be said that Commissioner Nutbrock also worked with me on this project, so he needs to be recognized also.
Thank you. Yes, to the whole planning commission.
Okay, thank you very much. Good presentation.
Mayor, on that same thing, do we need to have possibly a work session with the planning commission, adjunct to a meeting where we can maybe kick this around a little bit? Would that be prudent?
Or we can have a work session with, I don't know, the whole planning commission would have to be there. I don't know what that would serve, but we could surely have a work session from our contract planner.
Just to not let it die completely, but just get the air of the laundry, so to speak.
Yeah, we'd be happy to do that.
Yeah, we can schedule a work session. Absolutely. That's not a problem.
That'd be a great idea. I wasn't involved in the last one in 2018, so
Okay.
it'd be good for some of us. that
No,
were there.
we'll definitely take a harder look at it then. Good. Thank you.
Yes.
Good presentation. So yeah, next public hearing is for the Schlentz annexation. And again, Mr. Stimmel will be.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, annexation is a process that's basically set up in state law and the RCWs, and there's different types of annexation methods that are out there, the direct petition method or the election method. The direct petition method is the most common one, and that's the one that's before you tonight. And so this is the Schlentz annexation, and Mr. Swanson pointed out to you where this is earlier. But this was subject to a 10% petition or notice of intent to annex sort of in the middle of last year, and then the latter half of the year the applicant submitted their 60% petition, which is kind of the second step of the process in annexation. So I have a coworker here with me tonight, Emma Johnson, who's been helping me with this project, and she has written the staff report and been working with the applicant on this. And so I'm going to invite her to the podium, and she's going to sort of give you some more of the details here. And then I'll still be available for questions, and at some point Tony Cooper, is city engineer, is also going to jump up and talk about utilities and access.
Very good. Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. So this is actually the property, the Schlentz property here, as Jeff pointed out earlier. The timeline of the application, I won't go through too much because Ethan mentioned it, but the key points here are that the applicant did the 10% annexation or notice of intent in April 2019, and that was accepted by City Council without modification the following month. We did receive 2 public comments during the notice of application. After that, we issued the SEPA determination of non-significance for the rezone, and we did not receive any public comments on that. This is just an overview of the project site. It is 1 tax lot. It's a little bit under 5 acres. It's within the UGA, and the city limits, if you can see them, run along the north and the east, and then down over here. It's currently vacant, except that there is a driveway that you can see in the south corner, and that provides access to the property to the south, which is a single-family home. There is an existing private access easement and covenant, which I'll mention in a minute. The current county zoning is single-family residential with an urban holding overlay, and proposed zoning under the city would be low-density residential, LDR 7.5, also with an urban holding overlay. So what I wanted to mention about the easement and covenant that I mentioned a second ago, one requirement to be eligible for annexation is you have to be within the UGA boundaries. So the legal property or parcel includes this little portion down here, but that extends outside of the UGA boundary. And so the Clark County has separated them into 2 tax lots, and the applicant is only proposing annexation of the tax lot within the UGA. And then that covenant and easement, the easement is for the driveway that you could see on the aerial, and then the covenant restricts any permanent structures on this portion along the south here. Because they are private and because no development is proposed at this time, we don't see a conflict with the easement or covenant. This is a brief overview of the criteria that you're being asked to look at tonight. It goes into more detail on page 7 in the staff report. But for those 3 items, lead agency review of the checklist has been finished, and there were no comments on that. Item C, the county has issued a certification of sufficiency, and that's included in the staff report packet. For item B, I'll invite Tony up here to comment on capital facilities.
Thanks, Emma. Mayor, City Council, Tony Cooper, City of La Center. So if I can scroll down here, the part of the requirement of annexation is that there be it would be feasible to have capital facilities access and utilities for this site. So right now, there's a Holly Park subdivision, which was recently approved, the plat was approved. So there's a public right-of-way here on East Second Way. And so that is one point that is a feasible access to this parcel. Now, there would have to be dedicated public streets from the dead end of that East Second Way to along East Ivy to this parcel. So there would have to be publicly dedicated streets. The other access point is actually up Ivy Avenue all the way to 4th Street. However, that is actually owned by the school district. And so the city currently has an easement along this for right-of-way and utilities, but there is no, it's not a public access way. So, so there is a couple ways to access this parcel, but this is probably the most feasible since there's already a public right-of-way that dead ends here on Ivy. The second thing is on the utilities. I'll go back to the map, but as part of the development of Holly Park, the developer was required to extend public facilities to the west end of East Second Way. And so right now there's a 2-inch force main, public force main that is stubbed right here to this west end of Ivy. The applicant, it is feasible for the applicant to extend that 2-inch force main to serve the parcel and the subdivision, future subdivision, when it's developed. They would have to do a feasibility study of that 2-inch force main to determine if there's enough capacity in that to serve this. Another option is on East 4th, there's an existing 8-inch sewer main that the developer could, or the applicant could extend a force main all the way up to that 8-inch gravity main in 4th Street. However, they would have to get permission from the school district to be able to do that in some form of a utility easement. There's also an 8-inch water main here that's stubbed to the west end of Ivy, and the applicant would have to extend that water main down to the development. Now, they'd have to work with CPU on the feasibility of that water main and pressures, and so there might be some requirements from them for extending that water main. We also contacted the fire department asking about this one access point, and the fire department said that if this one access point is used, these buildings would have to be sprinklered. So that's a requirement of the fire department, that because of that one access point, they would allow that only with sprinkling in those buildings. I think that's about it. Are there any questions?
With all the challenges that this parcel possesses, do we know what their plans are with it?
We don't. I don't know that I think it's zoned for LDR 7.5, so it would be single-family residences, and I don't know if they've proposed anything else, but I think that's... Go ahead.
We just made a couple of assumptions when we were looking at this, because we had to consider based on the most intense development allowed based on zoning. So when we looked at the property and we excluded riparian areas as well as the strip along the bottom that is per the private covenant not allowed to have permanent structures, we would estimate about 15 single-family homes would fit on this property. More questions? I can wrap up really quick.
Yep.
The staff recommendation would be to approve with 3 conditions of approval, and those conditions are very standard for an annexation. So one is zoning LDR 7.5 with the urban holding overlay, and the urban holding overlay would limit development to 1 single residential unit until the capital facilities have been addressed. Once those are addressed, which would be during when the applicant submits site plan review, they would have to provide evidence of capital facilities being met. Once that is done, they would remove the overlay under a type 2 review, and per state requirements, the property would be assessed and taxed by the city in the same manner as other properties. Any questions?
Thank you very much. So any discussion or questions by the council before we open up the public hearing? Okay, with that, at 7:52, I will open it up for public comment. If anyone would like to comment, please step up to the podium, give us your name and address, and limit your comments to 3 minutes.
Hello, my name's Eric Kahn, and I'm at 30900 Northeast 26th Avenue. My family was the family that sold 100 acres to the county on the bottomlands, and we still own several pieces on the far east side of that. One 15-acre piece that I own basically butts right to the back of the Schlentz property. And there's an old road that I've been here since the 60s, but there's an old road that my dad used to drive his tractor up to get gas, continuously, and it's still there. I think it was a flue at one time, and it runs over part of the school property and just a mere corner of the Schlentz property, and then down through the county. And I've recently been pursuing getting legal access through the county and through the school board, talking to both the superintendent of our school here in La Center and walking the trail so he knows exactly what we're looking at, as well as the county, and talking to Kevin Tyler and trying to, and having a response that he would, certainly move it up. Because at this point, that 15-acre parcel, I do have a buildable spot there. And it's, the county's, agreed that it's a buildable spot, but obviously if anyone's gone across the bridge and looks over there in January, you can see there's quite a bit of water down there, and it virtually landlocks me. And 9 months out of the year. So, when we bought the property with a deeded easement through the center off of 10th Street. And you can do some, look at that. But those streets were taken out, and park was putting in, and the water treatment facility putting in, and that easement is somewhere in through there, but very difficult to do now. So we're looking at, basically having a landlocked piece of property in Washington. I understand through Brian Wolf and my other attorney that it's, that's illegal, and that there must be some way to do that. And my question here tonight is basically, is the annexation of the Schlentz property going to stop me in pursuing an easement all up along there in some way? And that's my concern. So, and that's basically, and I'd be open to, talk with, the city attorney about maybe other options, or, trying to find a solution that we can have so that I can actually, not have a landlocked piece.
Sure, absolutely.
Okay?
Very good. Thank you. Would either Mr. Spool, or please, go ahead.
Hi there. So my name is Stephanie Klein. I live at 33100 Northeast Ivy. That's my house that you saw on the slideshow at the end of the road. So I'm here today because obviously the annexation of the property next door to us will greatly impact us. We currently are the only house that Northeast Ivy is serving beyond where the school district ends. And because of the development next to us, we have seen a lot of traffic on a road that was never intended to be a high traffic zone, including a trail system that was that's been put in there, which is fine for pedestrians. But with the annexation of the property, I am wondering what is going to happen to Northeast Ivy. So right now, we have an easement, and the easement is for the road, which is owned by the property. So then does the road become a public road? If so, who's in charge of the road? So right now, it's tore up because when they put the subdivision in, they used Ivy to build. Now that it's there, they're no longer using Ivy, but Ivy is still a gravel, torn-up road. So are we responsible for it? Is the city responsible for it? And at what point, because we know that the writing's on the wall, we see that the end of 2nd Street there is just, it's not even the end of a road, it's just a fence. We know that's going to be built across, and so we know that there's going to be 15 houses that are going to be put in next to us. At what point will our access to our home change? When we no longer have our road? That's a concern of mine. Obviously, between now and the interim, what is that going to look like? And what is it going to look like for us to be able to protect our property? Because we have people coming to our house daily. So currently, the way Northeast Ivy is built over a culvert. It was built a very long time ago, very rudimentary. It's meant for very low traffic. If you put in a subdivision next to us with 15 houses, you will for certain have people coming down Ivy as a shortcut to enter that subdivision as opposed to going all the way around to come in on 2nd. So, given that and given the fact that it crosses a culvert, given the fact that it's very unsafe for, you would never want to have 2 cars. It's definitely built for a 1-car rudimentary road. My concern is the planning for the future of that road and of our quality of life, and we are the ones that have the covenant. We put the covenant in place when we bought the property from Peter Schlentz on purpose so that we couldn't have anyone building in front of us. However, we do realize that that then cuts our property off right at the tip there with just our driveway, and we want to know how we're going to access our road, our house in the future.
Okay, thank you. So, Ethan, would you or Emma like to address that, please?
Yeah, so just to address Mr. Kahn's comment, we talked about this a little bit over the phone roughly a week or maybe a little bit less ago, and it does sound like he has an informal access. Let's pull up the aerial here. It sounds like his parcel is kind of down in this area.
Yeah.
And then he has an informal access, a gravel dirt road that travels up and then kind of crosses this northeast part of the Schlentz property. And so it sounds like because that's informal, there's no easement there, and so he would need to work with the Schlentz property to either gain an easement there to continue to access that, or during the subdivision process when this property is developed, it's likely that staff would require that there be a road, at least one road stub on this property line for, to account for future development, and then Mr. Kahn could hook his road into that stub, and then at that point there would be public roads within serving the Schlentz property, and he could drive down the public roads just like anyone else could. And then in terms of Ms. Klein's comment, she's right that Ivy is sort of a substandard private road, and it's the city has an access and utility easement over it that Tony was mentioning, and so she does have a legally recorded easement that follows this sort of driveway that slash road that you can see on the aerial photo there. And so as part of the subdivision review process, one of the things that the applicant is required to do is to submit those easements, and we're already aware of them, but to provide those easements and to protect that because she has a legal right to it. And so either a public road would be developed along that driveway, continuing to give her access, or that would remain undeveloped, but she would still have the easement as it stands today. In terms of access generally to the property, I think Tony Cooper, the city's engineer, mentioned that there's a road stub from the recently developed Holly Park subdivision on the east side of the Schlentz property, and so that's one form of access to this property. It's possible that in the future, but maybe somewhat unlikely, that they would access the property along Ivy Street because there's a substandard culvert there, and that culvert would have to be upgraded and replaced, and that would be pretty expensive for the development of the Schlentz property. So that's why we're saying it's somewhat unlikely that there would be an access along Ivy Avenue. But Ms. Klein, similar to Mr. Kahn, would have access through the Schlentz subdivision, either along public roads in the subdivision or along this private access easement that she continues to, that she has in place right now. But if the Ivy access, was developed and that culvert was replaced, it would have to be upgraded to city public road standards, and so that would sort of account for some of the concerns about traffic and the current inability of that road to handle that level of traffic, because it would be upgraded to meet public road standards. Thank you.
Real quick, Ethan. When you were talking about stubbing it out for this gentleman here, is that done by a city mandate, or is that going to be something that you have to leave up to the landowner for that annexation there, or the developer?
The city usually requires that any road that's adjacent to the edge of a subdivision be stubbed to it like that, and that's similar to what happened with Holly Park subdivision over here with the East 2nd Street subdivision, and so that's what would happen here as well.
If they planned a road there, right? If they didn't plan that and they just built houses around it, then there's no road there and no mandate for a stub, correct?
Well, so knowing what we know now about the property, we would require that be stubbed there so that that doesn't create a landlocked parcel.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Okay, good. Thank you. So anyone else for the public comment? So,
I'm going to come back up really quick.
sure.
I'm really sorry, but I'm going to come back up really quick and just say that you guys, I don't know if you've been down Ivy, but it is a hazard. We will have people that will go off the road into the culvert because there's no way to turn around on Ivy unless you come all the way to our house, and we plan to put up a gate so that people can't do that. So just so y'all know, people are going to use that as a shortcut. So even if you plan on coming through 2nd, people are still going to try to go down Ivy, and they're going to have to try to go in reverse over a skinny road over a culvert. I just think it's prudent of me to mention it. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, any other comments? Seeing no one stepping up to the podium at 8:05, I will close the public comment period and turn it back over to council for any other discussion or comments.
Tony, I have a question for you. Is there any plans for Ivy in the future? Or widening or anything like that?
North of East 2nd Way, no, because it's on school property. So there wouldn't be any plans by the city to use that for any reason. Other than I think there's a small force main from the shop that actually pipes the sewage up to 4th Street sewer, but really it's used for access. I know a lot of people use it down to from 4th Street to the park there, and park there for picking up kids from school. But south of there, that's the question. That culvert is substandard. It was built years ago. If it was ever proposed to be a public access way, it would have to go through probably critical areas permitting. Might have to be a big, large culvert to meet all sorts of standards that the Department of Ecology would require. So I don't think it's feasible for that to ever happen. And I don't know if it would be the city's best interest to extend that, especially, we'd have to get some kind of permission from the school to even use that. It is used right now, but not south of the shop area, because that's not, that's all private.
So knowing that it might not be safe and that people would want to use this as another means of access, is there a way for us to put some sort of a barricade there to stop people from going in and out of it and using it? Kind of a separation?
Yeah, we'd have to talk about that. I don't know. I mean, once the applicant proposes something, we'd have to look at the options to create a safe access way. But I don't know that we could restrict access to private property owners down there. I don't know which way you.
It's just us.
Yeah, it's just you. So,
Negotiate with us.
yeah, I mean, I guess we could look at that at that time, once the applicant came in with a proposal. Yeah.
Tony, what portion of Ivy does the school own? Is it all the way to 4th?
It's all the way, there's, I think when 4th Street was realigned years ago, there was some part of that intersection that was dedicated to the city. And I think what the future plan was to either put a signal there, probably a signal. I don't know if that's reasonable, but I think it was stubbed, the right-of-way was stubbed just short of 4th Street, just a little way south of it.
Okay.
But past there, that's all school property. And the city just has an easement, an access easement and utility easement to use that portion of it.
Is Mr. Schlentz aware of that, of the street situation?
Oh, yeah, I mean, I think everybody, yeah, I think he knows that. That's part of the restrictions of getting access to that is that it's not public, really public use for a public road. It's just access that the city has. Any other questions?
No, thank you, Tom.
Sure. Thank you. Any other discussion?
What happens there has an impact on the school. I don't know
Sure
if that.
does. The road is crazy already.
Yeah, I don't know what legal restrictions we have to take that into account, but I know that area very well. There's 3 crosswalks within 1 block, and that's a very typical spot for kids to walk from the school to the park and back. It's also where the buses pick up or drop off, whatever. It's just a really critical 1.5 blocks right there, so I don't know how that would work with the school owning road, how the city would even have a say in what happens there. Might be a good question to talk with you offline about what our limitations are and what we can and can't do. But
Tonight we're doing an annexation.
Right, we're not doing the development.
Future
I know, I'm
development,
just-
conditions of development are future. But
And it is the issues we can, this is the annexation, and not any other access issues.
So a lot of these issues would have to be addressed if and when a development was ever brought forward a proposed development was brought forward, and then that would have to go through plan review. That's when all these issues would have to be addressed. This, again, is just the annexation of that parcel into the city, not contemplating any kind of a development at this point.
That's correct, Mayor.
It'll just remain as is, a 5-acre parcel, rather than being in the county, it'll be in the city. But it would be eligible then for future development.
However, one question, if the road does become annexed with the property into the city, does it become a public road? Is it the public's responsibility to maintain it?
the status of the road doesn't change through the annexation.
Right.
I mean,
Okay,
Okay, thank you.
thank you.
I think some of the comments I've heard tonight definitely should be brought up. Should the property get to the point of potential development, then the comments I've heard tonight, I think definitely would need to be brought up at that time.
It would have to be brought up, absolutely, as part of the review process for any development. So again, all that's really being proposed this evening is the annexation of that parcel.
Mayor, I move to approve the Schlentz annexation subject to the conditions through ordinance 2020-02 and authorize staff to forward to Washington State OFM for approval.
I'll second that.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the Schlentz annexation, subject to the conditions through ordinance 2020-02, and authorize staff to forward to Washington State OFM for approval. This is an ordinance, so if I could please get a roll call.
Councilmember Boff?
Aye.
Councilmember Stimmel?
Yes.
Councilmember Williams?
Yes.
Councilmember Strobehn?
No.
Councilmember Cerveny?
Yes.
I'm sorry.
Yes.
The ordinance is adopted with a 4-to-1 vote. Thank you, council. So that's all we have on the agenda this evening, except for the council will be going into an executive session to discuss collective bargaining sessions with employee organizations, exempt from public meeting requirements per RCW 42-30-140. I anticipate we'll be in executive session for approximately 20 minutes, so we'll be out at approximately 8:35. Thank you, everyone, for being here.